So our next property says that if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. So this is called the transitive property. And if you think about it, it's almost like we transition. We go from A to B, and then, since B is over here as well, we go from B to C. It could also be kind of like substitution. You're substituting C in for B. But as far as properties go, we name this one the transitive property because we can transition from A equals B and B equals C straight down to A equals C. Our next property says that A plus 0 equals A and 0 plus A equals A. So you add 0 to a number and you get that number back. And we call this the identity property of addition, because we are only talking about addition here. So the identity is the number, in this case, that we add to get the same number back. And so that's 0, because anything plus 0 is going to give you the same number you started with. So the identity property of addition is a property of all real numbers, because if you add 0 to any real number, you're going to get that same number back. So our next property says that A plus the opposite of A equals 0, or the opposite of A plus A equals 0. And so I said opposite instead of negative, because what if A was negative? So if I had -2 plus the opposite of -2, would that give me 0? Well, that's -2. What's the opposite of -2? +2. And what's -2 plus 2? 0. So we call this property that says if I add the opposite, I'm going to get 0, the property of opposites. So it's the property of opposites. And we actually have a special name for A and -A, or A and the opposite of A. A and -A are called additive inverses. And all that means is that if you add them together, you get that 0, which remember was the identity property. If we added 0 to a number, we got itself back. So these are called additive inverses, because if I add A to -A, I get 0. So it's like doing the reverse of what I was doing. And we're going to be using that a lot when it comes to solving equations without having to plug numbers in. Alright, so our last property for all real numbers says that if I take the opposite of A plus B, it's just like taking the opposite of A plus the opposite of B. And so we call this rule the opposite of a sum. That's the property. And I want us to take a look. So if I have -2 plus 5, well, first thing I want to do is 2 plus 5 is 7. So the opposite of 7 is -7. But now I want to test our theory. Is that like -2 plus -5? Well, what's -2 plus -5? -7. So indeed it does work. So the opposite of a sum says that I can go from taking the negative of a sum and making it the sum of the negatives, or the opposites.